for 100 guests, a live microphone, and a groom about to destroy his own bride in front of everyone she loved, all for a bet made 8 months earlier in a living room full of bored, wealthy friends. What none of them knew was that the woman standing across from him at that altar had spent her entire career finding the exact kind of lie he was built from. By the time he finished his sentence, she had already taken him apart. This is the story of a woman everyone underestimated, and the bet that cost 4 men everything they had. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Why would 4 grown men decide that one quiet, composed woman deserved to be torn apart for entertainment? What did she already know about her own fiancé before he ever got down on one knee? And what really happened to all 4 of them in the year that followed her wedding day? Stay with this one. Nothing about how it ends is what you're expecting. Patricia Hensley was 33 years old and had built her entire adult life around one rule: never trust a story you haven't checked yourself. She was the senior partner at a financial risk advisory firm outside Charlotte, the kind of place that quietly handled the books of people who never wanted their names in a headline. She had earned that seat by being exact. She did not raise her voice in meetings. She did not need to. When she found an error, she circled it in red ink, set it on the table, and waited calmly for everyone else to catch up to what she had already understood 3 days earlier. Her colleagues respected her in the particular way people respect someone they are slightly afraid of, careful never to bring her a number they hadn't already checked twice themselves before walking into her office. She had learned this lesson the hard way, long before she ever sat behind a desk. Her father had been a charming man, the kind who remembered every birthday at church and never once remembered his own wife's. He ran a small construction business that quietly bled money for 14 years while he told the whole congregation things were going wonderfully. He drove a newer truck every few years, took the family on vacations they could not afford, and smiled through every Sunday service as though nothing in his life had ever gone wrong. He had a way of making other people feel foolish for asking too many questions, turning even reasonable concern into something that felt like an accusation, until eventually nobody in the family asked him anything at all. Patricia's mother found out the truth from a bank manager, not from her own husband, sitting in a small office being told there was almost nothing left to salvage. By the time the house was gone, Patricia was 19 years old, standing in an empty kitchen helping her mother pack boxes, and she made a private decision she never said out loud to anyone. Charm without proof was simply a way of hiding something. She would never again let herself be fooled by a man's surface. She remembered, specifically, the moment the moving truck pulled away from the curb, watching her mother stand on the lawn of a house that no longer belonged to them, and deciding right there that she would rather be called difficult for the rest of her life than be the kind of woman who finds out the truth from a stranger across a desk. She built her whole life around that decision. She dated rarely, and when she did, she quietly looked into a man's background the way other women check their horoscope, not out of paranoia, but out of habit, the same way a nurse washes her hands before she has any reason to expect infection. She was not interested in catching anyone in a lie for sport. She simply wanted to know, before she handed over anything that mattered, exactly who she was dealing with. She kept a small, almost ritual list of questions she asked early in any relationship, not to interrogate, but to listen carefully to how a man answered things that should have been simple, watching for the smoothness that comes from rehearsal rather than truth. The men in her social circle found this maddening. They called her cold when she wasn't in the room. They called her a challenge to her face, as if her caution were a game designed for them to win, a locked door they were entitled to eventually force open if they were patient or clever enough. Her firm had recently completed an audit that exposed financial mismanagement inside a local charity gala, the kind of quiet scandal that ends careers without ever making national news. The gala's organizer had been quietly skimming a percentage of donations for nearly 3 years before anyone thought to look closely enough to notice. And it was Patricia, working late on a Friday when everyone else had already gone home, who found the first inconsistency buried inside a spreadsheet nobody else had bothered to cross-check against the bank statements. The story picked up a small amount of press around the city, a few paragraphs in the business section, nothing more. Her photograph ran beside the article, professional, composed, unsmiling, identified as the analyst who found what nobody else had caught. It was a minor story in the larger scheme of the city, the kind of thing most people scrolled past without a second thought. But in one particular living room, in a triplex apartment overlooking the river, on one particular Friday night, for men who had never once had to work for anything were scrolling through their phones with the specific restlessness of people who needed a new target, the way bored men in expensive apartments often do when an ordinary evening starts to feel too quiet for their taste. Marcus Whitfield was 28, the son of a real estate developer whose name sat on 3 buildings downtown. He had never held a job longer than 8 months and had never needed to. He had tried law school for a semester, tried a finance internship his father arranged for a summer, tried, briefly, to start his own consulting firm that consisted mostly of expensive dinners and very little consulting. Each attempt had ended the same way, with Marcus losing interest the moment the work stopped being easy, secure in the knowledge that his father's name would always be there to soften whatever landing came next. With his 3 closest friends, Dale, Connor, and Bryce, he ran a small media company built on prank videos and so-called social experiments, content that mistook cruelty for entertainment as long as the views kept climbing. They had built a modest but loyal following doing exactly this kind of thing to strangers in coffee shops and parking lots, filming reactions, editing for maximum embarrassment, posting it all with captions that made the cruelty sound clever, never once pausing to consider what happened to the strangers after the cameras stopped rolling. It was Dale who pulled up Patricia's photo first. "Look at her," he said, "won't even smile for the camera, thinks she's above everybody." Connor said he'd heard about her from a cousin who tried twice to take her to dinner and got nowhere both times. "She doesn't date," Connor said. "Doesn't post anything personal. Doesn't need anybody." And then Bryce, the quiet one, the one who rarely spoke first in any room, said the sentence that changed everything. No man in this city could actually get that woman to fall for him. He said it almost idly, the way a person tosses out an opinion about a football game, with no idea what he had just set in motion. The room had been loud just moments before, music playing low in the background, glasses half empty on the coffee table, and now everyone had gone quiet around a single sentence. The room went still in the particular way a room goes still when a dare has been made, without quite being made out loud. Everyone looked at Marcus. He said he wasn't interested in chasing anyone for sport. Dale told him nobody was asking him to chase her, they were asking him to win her, all the way to a wedding, if he had what it took. Connor leaned forward and said it would be the easiest $50,000 any of them had ever spent, because watching Marcus actually try and fail would be worth half of it on its own. Bryce said nothing further, simply watching Marcus the way a person watches to see whether a comment will actually land or simply pass by unanswered. They shook hands before midnight, $50,000 and a new car on the line if he pulled it off, the kind of bet 4 men make when none of them has ever once had to live with a real consequence in their life. Marcus told himself it would take 3 months at most, already imagining, in the back of his mind, exactly how he would tell the story afterward to anyone who would listen. His first attempt lasted 4 minutes. He introduced himself at a charity benefit Patricia had organized, leaned against a column with practiced ease, and offered a compliment about her dress he had clearly used on other women before her. She thanked him politely, finished her wine, and walked away to speak to her catering coordinator. She did not think about him again that night, did not mention him to anyone, did not so much as glance back over her shoulder on her way across the room. For a man who had never once been brushed off so completely in his life, the dismissal landed harder than he expected it to, and he found himself replaying it in his head on the drive home, irritated in a way that had less to do with the bet and more to do with simple wounded pride. What Marcus understood, sitting alone in his car afterward, was that the usual approach was useless on a woman who didn't want anything from anyone. So he did something his friends would have mocked him for if they'd known how much effort it took. He studied her. He read the article about the charity audit twice. He found a short piece she had written for an industry newsletter about due diligence in nonprofit finance, and he actually read it. Underlining a few lines on a printed copy, he kept folded in his jacket pocket for weeks, returning to it the way a student returns to notes before an exam he actually wants to pass. He noticed she spoke about her staff with specific, protective detail, never vague praise, and that she responded to substance while walking straight past flattery, without slowing down even slightly. He understood something nobody else in the city had bothered to understand. Patricia did not want to be impressed. She wanted to feel safe enough to finally stop checking. He began again, carefully. He sent her an article about a financial scandal at a competing firm with no message attached except one line. Thought this might interest you given the gala audit. She read it. 3 days later, at an industry breakfast he had quietly arranged to attend, she mentioned it to the table, glancing once in his direction the way a person acknowledges a source without quite acknowledging the person behind it. He treated that glance like a door left slightly open and spent the following weeks becoming someone worth walking through it for. He cleared the loud parts of his public image, deleted nothing outright, but archived anything reckless where she might stumble across it. He stopped drinking heavily anywhere word might reach her. He started reading more broadly, not performatively, but because he found, almost against his own expectations, that he wanted to actually keep up with the kind of conversation she enjoyed having. He was patient, slow to speak, slower to perform, and he found, somewhat to his own surprise, that he did not mind the slower pace at all. When her firm lost a major client over a misunderstanding that wasn't her fault, Marcus didn't offer advice. He drove to her office at 9 at night with the dinner she'd once mentioned liking and simply sat with her while she worked, asking for nothing. He did not check his phone the entire time he was there. He did not perform patience for her benefit. He simply sat, quietly, while she sorted through the wreckage of a deal that had taken her months to build, occasionally refilling her water glass without being asked. And when she finally looked up 2 hours later, surprised he was still there, he only said he figured she shouldn't have to do that alone. That night cost him something he hadn't planned on. Driving home, he didn't call Dale to report progress the way he usually did. He sat in traffic in silence, turning over a feeling he didn't have a name for yet, uncomfortable with how much he had actually meant what he said to her, and uncomfortable, too, with how easily the bet had begun to feel like an afterthought rather than the entire point of what he was doing. Patricia let him in slowly, the way someone opens a window in a house sealed shut for years, testing the air before trusting it fully. She told him about her father one night on the phone, her voice quieter than usual, careful in a way that wasn't about hiding pain, but handling it correctly. He spent 14 years making my mother believe everything was fine, she said. The worst part wasn't even the lying. It was that she wasn't foolish. She was sharp. She just loved someone who used that love as leverage. Marcus told her he understood, and for the first time, meant it more than he expected to, surprised by how easily the words came when he wasn't trying to manufacture them. He found himself, in the days afterward, thinking about her mother in the empty kitchen, a story he had no part in and somehow still could not stop turning over in his mind. Over the following months they became, in every visible way, a real couple. She introduced him to her senior staff at a holiday dinner she rarely hosted for anyone, watching carefully how he spoke to the youngest member of her team rather than focusing his attention on the people in the room with the most influence. He met her mother at a lunch Patricia had clearly arranged as a quiet test, choosing a restaurant her mother liked rather than one that impressed anybody, and he passed it by being patient and actually listening, asking her mother questions about her own life rather than steering every conversation back toward himself. Patricia watched him across that table and let herself believe, for the first time in over a decade, that she had finally chosen well. She found herself, in quiet, unguarded moments, imagining a future she had stopped allowing herself to imagine years earlier, allowing small details to slip past the careful filter she had maintained since she was 19 years old. He proposed on an ordinary Tuesday evening, no audience, no production, just the two of them and a ring he had spent real time choosing, sitting with 3 different jewelers before settling on one that looked like something she would have picked herself rather than something flashy. "I'm not going to perform this," he told her. "I'll just say it plainly. You're the person I want to be honest with for the rest of my life." The irony of that sentence landed somewhere behind his ribs even as he said it, a discomfort he pushed down before it could reach his face. She said yes quietly, no tears, just her hand in his, and a long, slow exhale, the sound of a woman finally setting down a weight she had carried for so long that putting it down felt strange, almost unfamiliar, after so many years of carrying it without complaint. Patricia had not survived her own childhood by being naive, and she had not built her career by accident. 8 months before the wedding, well before any proposal, She had done what she always did with anything that wanted access to something she valued. She looked underneath it. It started small. A dissolved business venture connected to one of Marcus's friends that had folded under unexplained circumstances. Probably nothing, she told herself, and filed it anyway, the same way she filed every small irregularity that crossed her desk at work, regardless of how minor it seemed in the moment. Then she noticed inconsistencies in the media company the four men ran together, invoices that didn't match production costs, payments routed through accounts that didn't belong to the business, small enough discrepancies that an untrained eye would have missed them entirely. But Patricia had spent her entire career trained to notice exactly this kind of thing. She did not go looking for these things out of suspicion toward Marcus specifically. She did it the same way she vetted every person who came close enough to matter, quietly, methodically, without ever mentioning it to anyone, keeping a private folder on her own personal laptop rather than anywhere connected to her firm. There were nights she sat with that folder open long after Marcus had gone home, reading through old filings and public records with the same focus she gave to a major client account, telling herself each time that she was simply being careful, not yet willing to call it anything more serious than caution. By the time Marcus proposed, she had something closer to an early-stage audit than a folder of suspicion, the same instinct she used on every client who crossed her desk, now quietly turned on the man she was about to marry. She said yes anyway, and she was honest with herself about why. The evidence was still circumstantial. She had wanted to be wrong. And underneath the caution, she had genuinely come to love the version of him she had been shown. Even while some careful part of her kept building the file, just in case that version turned out to be a performance. She told herself she would know the difference eventually, one way or another, and that whatever happened, she would not be the one left blindsided. The wedding took on a life neither of them fully authorized. 380 guests, a ballroom dressed in ivory and sage green, a dress that looked exactly like Patricia herself, composed on the surface and considered all the way through. She handled every detail personally, the seating chart, the florist contracts, the timing of the toasts, treating the entire event with the same precision she brought to a major client file, color-coding vendor confirmations the way she color-coded audit findings. She did not see the messages passing between Marcus's three friends in the days before, confirming camera angles, confirming who would control the screen behind the altar, confirming that whatever footage played would be impossible to stop once it started. Dale had already spoken to the venue's audiovisual technician about access to the system days in advance, offering him a generous tip to look the other way if anyone questioned the unusual request. Marcus sat in his suit 2 hours before the ceremony, tie undone, staring at nothing. Dale came in without knocking and reminded him what they'd agreed to, reminded him the footage existed either way. And this was simply the version where Marcus controlled the moment instead of having it leak without him. It was a threat dressed as practical advice, and Marcus recognized it as exactly that, and still found himself unable to argue with the part of it that was true. He thought, briefly, about telling Patricia everything right then, about walking out before any of it began, picturing the conversation in his head several different ways, none of which ended anywhere good. And then he thought about the 8 months invested in the reputation he had built among his friends, and he tied his tie instead. The ceremony itself was the kind of beautiful that comes from every detail chosen with care. Patricia walked down the aisle steady and composed, and when she reached him, she said only 2 words, quiet enough for just the 2 of them. "You're here." "I'm here," he said. The officiant began. The room was completely still, 380 people leaning slightly forward in their seats the way people do when they sense they are witnessing something they will talk about for years. When it came time for vows, Marcus reached for the microphone instead of speaking from where he stood, a small deviation the room mistook for projection. He held it a moment too long before he spoke. "I need to say something," he said. "I can't do this." The smile left the room before the sound did. A silence so complete the hum of the air conditioning became audible. Somewhere near the back, a chair shifted against the floor, and the sound carried across the entire room, sharp enough that several guests turned to look toward it instead of the altar. The screen behind the altar lit up before anyone could ask him to explain. Edited footage of the 4 friends in that living room months earlier, drinks in hand, casually discussing the bet with the carelessness of men who never once considered consequences. Marcus will have her at the altar in 4 months, 6 at the outside. One of them said on the recording, played back now to 380 witnesses in real time. Patricia stood in her wedding dress and watched herself be unwrapped in front of everyone she knew, and she did not cry. That was the detail people would talk about for months afterward. She stood perfectly still, watching the screen the way she watched a ledger with an error in it, assessing rather than absorbing, her hands steady around the bouquet she still carried. Marcus, still holding the microphone, said the thing he would regret for years. "You were never hard to get," he said. "You were just lonely." He set the microphone down. His friends were already moving toward the exit, laughing, already treating the wreckage of an actual woman's life as content for their next upload. Patricia watched them go, set her bouquet carefully on the altar ledge, the way someone finishes something they are finished with, turned, and walked out the opposite door, her back straight the entire way down the aisle, past 380 guests who did not know whether to look at her or away. Patricia was at her desk by 7 the next morning, not as a performance of strength, simply because the work was there, and she had never once let pain stop the work from getting done. Her junior partner knocked at 9, visibly unsure whether to mention the wedding at all. Patricia told her to pull a client file for an 11 o'clock meeting, and by noon the office had quietly steadied itself around her, the way offices do when the person at the center refuses to come apart. A few staff members exchanged glances in the hallway, unsure how a woman could walk in the morning after something like that and behave as though nothing unusual had happened at all. Though 1 or 2 of the older employees who had worked with her longest understood exactly what they were watching, having seen her absorb other blows in the same composed way over the years. What none of her staff knew was that the file Patricia had built 8 months earlier had stopped being circumstantial the moment Marcus stepped away from that microphone. Over the following weeks, she did what she had always done best, quietly, with sourcing clean enough that no single leak could ever trace back to her. She reconnected with a financial journalist she had worked with for years, someone who owed her nothing but trusted her instincts completely after a decade of accurate tips that had never once led him astray. She had a conversation with a state regulatory contact who owed her a favor from an old audit, the kind of favor that gets called in exactly once in a career, meeting him quietly for coffee rather than risking a call that could ever be traced. 2 women reached out to her privately after the wedding footage circulated online, not with pity, but with information about Marcus's friends they had been sitting on for a long time, unsure who to tell, finally given a reason to come forward by watching someone they didn't even know refuse to fall apart in public. What Patricia built was not a revenge fantasy. It was a set of clean, self-contained cases, each one built to stand entirely on its own evidence, none of them traceable back to a jilted bride with a grudge. Marcus's family development company had been quietly overstating costs on 2 municipal contracts, the difference routed through an entity registered under his mother's maiden name, a detail Patricia had noticed buried in a filing more than a year earlier and simply never mentioned to anyone. Patricia had access to none of this through Marcus directly. She simply made certain the right documents reached the right desk through channels that traced back to no one. The story ran within a month. The municipal contracts were frozen within the week after that, and the family's name, once a fixture on 3 downtown buildings, became something local reporters wanted to ask harder questions about, questions that no amount of charm from Marcus's father could quite manage to deflect. Dale's media company lost its 2 largest advertisers once a detailed account of footage filmed without consent reached their compliance departments through entirely proper channels. The kind of letter that compliance officers cannot legally ignore once it lands on their desk. Connor's family quietly distanced themselves once a former business partner began answering a journalist's careful questions about old financial dealings nobody had thought to revisit in years, conversations that revealed far more than Connor had ever wanted made public. Bryce, the quietest of the 4, lasted the longest, but careful men still speak freely around people they trust. And Bryce had trusted Marcus, and Marcus had said things in front of Patricia, in her own home, in the easy intimacy of a relationship he believed he controlled, that she had simply never forgotten. None of it required her to raise her voice once. Marcus came to her office 8 months after the wedding. He waited 40 minutes in the reception area, and when Patricia finally appeared, she led him to a small glass-walled meeting room, visible from the open floor, deliberately. Nothing about this would happen in private, which meant nothing about it could later be misrepresented. He looked smaller somehow, sitting across the table from her, the easy confidence that had once carried him through every room now visibly gone, his hands resting on the table in a way that looked almost unfamiliar to him. "I need you to know what I felt was real," he told her. "Whatever else it was, however it started, it became real." "I know," she said. "Then why?" he started. "I knew before the wedding," she said. "Not everything." "Enough. Then why did you still say yes?" "Because I wanted to be wrong about you," she said. "And because some part of me hoped you'd choose to become better than what you started as." There was no anger in her voice, and that, more than anything, was what cost him. He apologized. She told him she knew that too. He asked if there was anything else to say, and she told him no, not unkindly, simply finally. "You should have broken my heart privately, Marcus," she said, standing, straightening the folder under her arm. "Humiliation didn't make me angry. It made me dangerous. There's a difference." She walked out, back to her desk, back to the work that had been waiting the entire time, exactly as it always had, leaving him alone in a glass room with nothing left to say to a woman who had already moved on without him. What happened to Patricia is a reminder worth sitting with long after this video ends. Marriage is not something to walk into on charm alone, no matter how convincing it feels in the moment. Take the time you need. Ask the questions you are afraid to ask. Watch how a person treats the people who cannot do anything for them, not just how they treat you when they want something from you. A good heart does not need 8 months of secret research to prove itself, but a little patience and a little caution have saved far more women than impulsive love ever has. And to the men watching this, treat the women in your life the way you would want someone treating your own mother or your own sister. Respect is not a weakness, and a woman's dignity is never something to be wagered, filmed, or turned into a joke for an audience. The men in this story lost far more than a bet. They lost the kind of trust that does not come back twice. If this story moved you, let us know in the comments, and if it touched you in any way, go ahead and subscribe so you do not miss the next one we tell.